So today we're checking out Bloodblade KARIN. We're going to take a look at her kit, see how and where to use her, how to gear her, and see if she is worth it to you. BBK is a 4-star Dark Thief. Her S1 is Sequential Cutter. She hits you with her sword and she lifesteal depending on how much damage she does, and not only that, she does push up her CR on a hit and on a kill. Then her S2 passive is Cursed Sword. As her health decreases, her defense, attack, and speed goes up. It goes in increments of 75, 50%, and 25% HP. And at the start of the battle, she will also be granted with immortality for 1 turn. Then finally, her S3 is Blood Art Degen. She sacrifices 20% of her HP and unleashes an AoE attack on everybody. This attack cannot be countered, and afterwards she will grant herself attack buff for 2 turns. Also, if she is able to kill with this attack, she will be granted an extra turn. So now that we know BBK's kit, what are her strengths? Her S1 is quite strong even though it does not have any debuffs. It hits pretty hard, but not only that, it does lifesteal as well as push the CR on a hit and on a kill as I mentioned before. Then combine that with the S2 passive. As she gets hit and loses the HP, she is going to get stronger, which will let her hit harder. But not only that, she does get more defense and speed as well to help her survive. And now speaking of survivability, from this last buff, she now has immortality at the beginning of the battle, which means that if she gets beat up, she is still going to be alive, which does give her a chance to unleash the S3. The S3 is pretty strong, especially if you are able to have the S2 active. And her S3 again does sacrifice 20% of her HP, which does not actually put her into the passive state, which gives her more attack because it requires 75% HP loss. But as long as anybody hits her at all, she will probably drop to at least 75% when she activates the S3. And now she will also get an attack buff after the S3, which means that if you are able to kill, you are going to be able to S1 and do some pretty juicy damage, which could result in a kill because you just used the S3 as well. And now the most beautiful part of BBK is that her kit completely synergizes with itself. It gives her the power to kill, but also the power to survive, which is all you could ask for in a hero, to have a full kit that actually works together with itself. But not only does it work together by itself, it actually tries to push you towards a certain build because it no longer requires you to build high speed. Because of her own CR push, it gives her the chance to take a turn, and if she is not able to take a turn, she also has the immortality to make sure she doesn't die before she even takes that turn. So now that we've talked about her strengths, what are her weaknesses? One of her biggest weaknesses, strangely enough, is one of the most recent buffs, which is the immortality. The fact that she gets immortality at the beginning of the battle instead of proccing it when she reaches 0 HP, just like KARIN, just like Sven, just like Berseria. This gives the enemy a chance to actually strip the immortality before she even gets to make use of it. So I personally do not understand why they did it this way. The only reason I can think of is that they did not want her to be too strong. So because of the recent buffs which gave her immortality and the CR push, it actually sways people to build her a certain way, which is a more of a degen and a slower BBK. Now having her this slow and relying on the counter to push her CR, it means that the enemy can completely ignore her. Ignoring her means that she is not going to do as much damage because her S2 passive will not be in play. But not only that, her immortality will completely go to waste because no one's even trying to kill her. And again, because she is so slow and she's going to rely on a counter to push her own CR, if you don't hit her, she's not going to counter, she's not going to push up, so she will take forever to even take that first turn, which could result in somebody else on your team dying before BBK even moves. Another weakness to her is that if she even counters, she's just going to do damage. She doesn't have any debuffs at all. She doesn't have a poison, a defense break, attack down, nothing at all, so she is just a pure damage kind of hero, which could be a good thing because she's very strong, but it can also be a bad thing because she's unable to weaken the enemy team aside from just straight up killing them. And now the last thing, I do not know if you can consider this a weakness, but I kind of do, and that is that she is a very high investment hero. She is going to need a lot of molas and gear for her to really shine. So where do we use BBK? I do not think she is good in any PvE situation. Of course, there are going to be people who are going to say that she works here or she works there. But in my opinion, if she is not a strong pick, if she is not a top contender in a certain PvE situation, I am not going to recommend her there or say that she is good there, especially when there are easier to obtain 3-star heroes that can do the job the same or better with less investment. but luckily she does work very well in PvP. In arena offense, she is one of the OGs, one of the original cleavers from the beginning of the game. So she was a cleaver back then and she is still a cleaver now. Remember, you cannot counter that S3. Then in Guild Wars, she is going to work very similarly. Of course, cleaving in Guild Wars is slightly different than arena. It is not as common, I don't think, but you can still do it. Or you can play with her on a different build and she will still work in Guild War offense. Now in World Arena, you can use her. You could try to use her as a cleaver, but I do not think that she will work very successfully because, as people say, cleave is, well, it's kind of dead right now. So if you do want to bring her into World Arena, you will have to go with a slightly different build, which we'll talk about right now. And now the first build I am going to talk about is the original BBK build. It is the Cleaver build. This was the original build you used to kill RB because there was no extinction. So you had to kill RB twice and BBK did a very good job at that. For this build, you could really go with any gear set at all, but I do recommend speed, destruction, attack, or revenge. You can go immunity. It is not 100% needed because she does have immortality and you cannot counter that S3 again. So you can skip that immunity if you want and go with a crit. But if you really want, you go with pen. It does not apply to the S3, but it will apply to the S1. For the stats, I would go full on attack, as much attack as possible, then some crit damage, a lot of crit damage, and enough crit chance. I do recommend a minimum of 3.8k attack. I think you could definitely do better, especially since you're not concentrating stats in anything else. No speed, no health, defense, effectiveness, or resistance. So stack everything you have into attack and crit damage and enough crit chance. I would choose attack over crit damage because if she takes any damage, remember her S2 passive boosts her attack even more, while the crit damage doesn't get boosted. It is just what it is. Then for artifacts, we are going to go with the classic Cleaver artifacts, which is Symbol of Unity or Portrait of Saviors. If you do not want to use those, which I don't know why you wouldn't unless you don't have one, you could go with RNL just to try to get an extra turn. Or you could go with Basket. I do not recommend Basket over RNL because most of the times if you have a pusher for your BBK, that pusher is also going to give her attack buff. So you are only moving from an attack buff to a greater attack buff, which does make a difference, but is it worth it, the RNG? I don't know. But if you want to have some fun, you could go with Wind Rider. If she kills with the S3, she is going to do an insane amount of damage with the upcoming S1. Then you could go with Elia's Knife as well. That's always a pretty solid choice. But again, this Elia's Knife will not proc on that very first attack because it only works if they are not at full HP. So it will pretty much only work when you follow up with that S1. And now the next build, which I think is the better build, especially now after all of these buffs. And this is the Degen build. Now you are going to put her on a counter set. You could go immunity, but you don't really have to if you don't want to. If you don't want to, then, you know, put it on a crit or even a pen set. Though I do personally prefer an immunity set over everything, especially if your hero is going to be so freaking slow. Now the stats for this build are quite balanced. You want to balance between attack, crit damage, health, and defense, with of course a lot of crit chance because, well, you want a freaking crit. It is up to you how you want to balance these stats, but you do have to balance them because if you do not have enough attack, she is not going to do enough damage. If you do not have enough defensive stats, she's going to be way too squishy and she will just die right away without the chance to counter and heal up. Now the balance between defense and health is quite a tricky one, but it does depend on your personal preference. I personally do prefer having more defense than health on a hero that does lifesteal. And this does apply especially to BBK because remember, her S2 passive does scale off of her own lost HP percentage. So if she has low health, it will be easier for her to become stronger. And not only that, it means that she will be able to lifesteal more, recovering more health while being able to be hit for less health because she has high defense. So in my mind, it just makes way more sense to stack a ton of defense rather than health, but again, you still do want some health. And now for artifacts, I do recommend MLDB over everything. MLDB I just think is a super solid artifact if you do a Degen build, because you have that evasion for the extra survivability. Of course, you can argue that Shepherd of the Hollow could be better, but I do prefer MLDB. The reason you would argue that Shepherd of Hollow could be better is because she does provide her own attack buff on the S3, which means that the built up attack from the last health could be better than the attack buff from MLDB. However, in my defense, I think MLDB is better because if she is getting hit before she even uses the S3, you do have a chance to proc that attack buff, which does mean you do have a chance to counter with that attack buff as well. So that is why I choose MLDB over Shepherd of Hollow. but it is up to you what you want to use. I think they are both very solid artifacts for this build. The other two artifacts I do recommend for survivability is Proof of Valor, because we all know what Proof of Valor does. It just makes you freaking tanky. But now you can also go Shepherds of Chaos. Because of the buff, you now get an extra defense, and because of the lost health thing, which does stack with her passive even more, she is going to get even more defense. And not only that, she is going to get a ton of freaking evasion. The downside of this is that you do not get any attack stats. But if you don't want any of that evasion or tanky crap, you can go RNL, just because RNL is always a pretty fun artifact to play with. Now my final thoughts on BBK. In PvE, she doesn't really shine anywhere, so I didn't really give her any ratings here. In PvP, however, I do think she is quite good in Arena. She is a very solid cleaver, but sadly that is all she is in Arena. I gave her a decent rating because if she works, she is going to work very well. She's just not going to work all the time because you can't use her all the time. Same with Guild War. You can use her as a cleaver here, but you can make use of the Degen build as well. She's just not going to find a lot of scenarios where she is going to shine. But if you are able to find a matchup that she can fight in, she is going to do quite well. Now World Arena, this is where I think she does shine best in the PvP category. It is going to be very hard to use her on a cleaver build in World Arena, especially since she is going to need a pusher. So of course you are probably going to use her on a Degen build if you bring her to World Arena, and if you are able to draft her into a good comp against a weaker comp, which is, generally what you want, she is going to shine. This is how I play my BBK, and I have a ton of fun with her in World Arena. Of course, when she doesn't work, it does get a little depressing, but when she does work, it's pretty hilarious and it's really freaking fun. So now if you are thinking about building your BBK, what is the ROI on BBK? I think the Mola investment is a little brutal. I did put 17 Molas as a minimum, but I personally, honestly think if you want to use BBK, you're going to have to max her. And that'll end up taking a total of 27 Molas, so 10 more than what I said was the minimum. And not only are you going to have to invest a ton of Molas, you are going to have to invest a ton of gear. Of course, this depends on how you want to build your BBK though. If you are going for a cleaver build, I do think she is much easier to build because you only have to concentrate on a ton of attack, crit damage, and enough crit chance. However, if you are going for a Degen build, all Degen builds, in my opinion, take an immense amount of gear quality for it to work successfully, because you need as many stats as possible and as high as possible. There are no stats you really want to ignore. Of course, you can ignore speed, effectiveness, and effect resistance, as I mentioned before, but having to invest in 4-5 different stats to push as high as possible is still a lot of work. So after hearing all that, is it really worth investing all that into BBK? I do think it's worth it, but maybe at the same time it might not be worth it. Depends on how you look at it. If you really want to be competitive and you want to stay in the meta and just try to build only the best heroes, I do not think she is going to be worth it. But I think she is always going to be usable. If you like playing with her and having fun, she is always going to be usable because of how her kit is built. And now moving on to probably the most important thing, which is the waifu rating. I love how BBK looks. I generally like how KARIN looks in the first place, and BBK is just a crazier version of her, which I cannot complain about. I really like her outfit and her tiny skirt, and she has a red sword, and her sheath has a ton of talismans on it, which just makes her even crazier looking. Then you slap an eye patch on that, you really can't complain. And even her personality, I love it. I really like KARIN in the first place, and BBK is, like I said, a crazier version of that, which, I kind of like. So combining those two things, would you put a ring on it? Yeah, it's probably not one of the best decisions you will make in your life, but it could be worth it until the point where you get murdered. So now wrapping this up, is BBK worth the pull? I would say yes, but also no. Because BBK is a 4-star ML hero, she will never get a banner. The only time you can choose to actually try to pull for her is in the Mystic banner, and generally you do not want to go for the 4-star rather than the 5-star. So if you already have a lot of heroes and you just for some reason do not have BBK and you are willing to risk your Mystics to try to pull for the 4-star because you just really like her, then yeah, she could be worth it. But if you are missing a lot of heroes, you are free to play, you don't want to waste your Mystics, I do not recommend you pull for her. If you are trying to pull for the 5-star and you get her, then cool. But if you already have the 5-star, if you don't want the 5-star, I would not throw in those Mystic medals just to try to pull BBK. It is probably not going to be worth it. But as always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below or join the Discord and we'll try to help you out. But I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe. Thank you for hanging out with us, and I'll see you guys next time, man. Bye.